Looking back at 87 years old, I see that the biggest mistake of my life happened in just a few days in May 1961. 2 wedding rings, 2 husbands, and a lie that would destroy not only my life, but everyone around me. Hello, my name is Eleanor Bradford. I was born in 1938 in a tiny town in West Virginia, so small you've probably never heard of it. Millbrook, near Charleston. Today I'm 87 years old, and I've decided to share with you the story I never had the courage to tell completely, not even to those closest to me. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel to not miss any life stories like mine, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It would be a great pleasure to know who you are on the other side, listening to the confessions of this old woman who has lived so much. I was born poor, so poor that often we didn't have enough to eat. My mother, Dorothy, was a washerwoman. My father died of pneumonia when I was only 8 years old. We had no money for doctors or medicine. He simply withered away before our eyes while my mother worked day and night at the washboards, cleaning clothes for the wealthy families in the area. Our house was just one room with a dirt floor and a roof that leaked during storms. We had to place basins and pots to catch the water. I slept on a mat on the floor next to my mother. In winter, the cold cut to the bone, and we would hold each other to stay warm. From age 9, I helped my mother wash clothes. My small hands already knew the weight of the bundles, the burn of lye soap, the pain of chilblains that opened in winter. School was just for 2 years. I learned to read, write, and do basic math. After that, work took all my time. Other girls my age played with dolls, dreamed of pretty dresses, of their debutante balls. I dreamed of a full plate of food, a real bed, a day when my mother wouldn't have to bend over the washboards at the river. When I reached my youth, I was a pretty girl, they said. Black hair, fair skin, large eyes. Mother said I had inherited the beauty of my Portuguese grandmother. But what good was beauty when you were the washerwoman's daughter? The boys from good families might look at me with desire, but never with respect. Girls my age looked at me with suspicion, as if my poverty was contagious or as if my beauty was a threat. At 21, I lost my mother. She simply didn't wake up one winter morning. The doctor later said it was her heart. I say it was exhaustion, the hard life, endless work. My God, I'll never forget my mother's hands, deformed by work, fingers that wouldn't close properly anymore, nails almost non-existent, skin a mass of calluses and cracks. On the last day we talked, she held my hands in hers and said, "Daughter, don't end up like me. Find a better path. Promise." I promised with tears in my eyes. And that promise would change the course of my life in ways I could never have imagined. After my mother's burial, which only happened because her employers took up a collection to pay for the cheapest coffin, I found myself completely alone in the world. I continued working as a washerwoman, but Mother's clients began to look for other women. They said I didn't wash as well as she did, that I wasn't as meticulous, that I took too long. The truth was that I lacked my mother's resignation. I didn't accept that fate willingly. I wanted more. It was during this time in 1959 that I met Nathaniel. He was the son of Mr. Harrison, owner of the town's only pharmacy. Nathaniel had studied in Pittsburgh, knew how to speak eloquently, knew poetry, had refined manners. When I delivered clean clothes to their house, I sometimes found him in the backyard, smoking in secret from his father. He began to make conversation, to ask me questions about my life, to show me books he had brought from the city. For the first time, someone looked at me not as the pitiful washerwoman's daughter, but as a person, a woman. Nathaniel told me I was intelligent, that I deserved more from life, that I had a beauty different from the other girls in town. "You have your own light, Eleanor," he would say, and I, foolish as I was, drank in every word as if it were water in the desert. Our meetings became more frequent, more intimate. He would wait for me on the path to the river or arrange to meet me behind the church in the late afternoon, always hidden, always afraid his father would find out. Mr. Harrison was a severe man, proud of his position in town. He would never accept his only son getting involved with the washerwoman's daughter. In one of these meetings, after months of sweet words and veiled promises, Nathaniel kissed me for the first time. It was behind St. Benedict's chapel as the sun was setting. My heart nearly leaped out of my chest. I had never been kissed before. In my naivety, I thought it meant a commitment, that he was willing to stand up to his father for me. "Let's run away from here, Eleanor," he told me after a few more meetings. "I'll take you to Pittsburgh. I have a friend there who can get me a job at his drugstore. You'll never have to wash clothes again. You'll have pretty dresses, a real home, maybe even study." Those words were everything I wanted to hear. The promise of a life away from that place, away from poverty, away from painful memories, a chance to fulfill the promise I made to my mother on her deathbed. "But your father?" I hesitated. "My father will have to accept it sooner or later, but first we need to establish ourselves. When he sees we're doing well, that we've built a respectable life, he'll end up forgiving us." I don't know if I really believed it, or if I just wanted to believe. The truth is, I began to dream of this new life, this escape, this liberation. Nathaniel and I began to plan everything in secret. He saved money, hidden from his father. I saved every penny I could from the washing. Our plan was to run away in early May, when there would be a festival in the neighboring town, and Nathaniel could leave without raising suspicions. It was exactly during this period, when our plans were almost ready, that fate put Walter in my life. Walter Montgomery was a fabric merchant who traveled throughout the state, a man of almost 35, ordinary in appearance, but gentle in manner. He came to our town every 2 months to sell his fabrics to local seamstresses. I met him when I was delivering clothes to Miss Eugenia's house, the most sought-after seamstress in town. Walter was there showing his new fabrics. When he saw me, something in his gaze changed. Later, Miss Eugenia told me he had asked about me. 2 weeks later, he approached me as I was leaving church. He was respectful and direct. He asked if he could walk me home. On the way, he told me about his life. He was a widower. His wife had died in childbirth with their first child, who also didn't survive. Since then, he had lived on the road selling fabrics, building his small fortune. "I'm tired of this traveling life, Miss Eleanor," he told me. "I want to settle in Charleston, open a permanent store, but a store needs a woman behind it, someone to care for it, organize it, give it life." I didn't immediately understand what he was insinuating. I thought he was just sharing his plans with me, as a friend would. "You are a hard-working woman, honest, beautiful. I've been observing you for several visits. I see how you deal with difficulties, how you remain dignified despite the circumstances. You're the kind of woman I'd like by my side." That's when I realized this was a kind of proposal. Not of love, perhaps, but of partnership, of a stable life, of respect. "Mr. Montgomery, I barely know you," I replied, embarrassed. "Time will help us know each other, Miss Eleanor. I'm offering a home of your own, a prosperous business, a life of respect. You will never again have to bend over the washboards at the river. Think about it. I'll return in a week for your answer." And that's what he did. He returned exactly a week later, while I was hanging clothes on the makeshift clothesline behind my house. He was well-groomed, clean-shaven, with a package in his hands. It was a cut of blue fabric, the most beautiful I had ever seen. "For you to make a new dress if you accept my proposal." I still hadn't given my answer. My head was in confusion. On one side, there was Nathaniel, with his promises of love, of a life in Pittsburgh, but without concrete guarantees. On the other, there was Walter, a man I barely knew but who offered security, stability, a home of my own, an established business. The fear of poverty is a terrible counselor, my dears. When you've gone hungry, when you've felt the contempt of others, when you've seen your mother die from overwork, you'll do anything to escape that fate. Anything. That's when I had the most senseless thought of my life. A thought that would change everything, that would ruin so many lives, that would mark me forever. What if I could have both options? What if I could ensure that no matter which of them kept his promise, I would be safe? It was madness, I knew. But desperation takes us to dark places in the soul, places where morality, principles, everything we've been taught as right seems distant and unimportant in the face of the need to survive. I told Walter I accepted his proposal but would need time to organize my departure. He was so happy he could barely contain himself. He promised to return in 2 weeks with everything prepared to take me to Charleston, where we would marry and begin our life together. Meanwhile, I continued with the escape plans with Nathaniel. He had managed to convince a friendly clerk in the neighboring town to marry us civilly without many questions. Everything was set for Monday, May 17th, 1961. In the days leading up to that date, I could barely sleep. What I was about to do was unimaginable. It was a terrible sin in the eyes of God and society. But fear spoke louder. The fear of ending up like my mother, the fear of being abandoned, the fear of hunger, of misery. On the morning of May 17th, I met Nathaniel on the road leading to the neighboring town. He was nervous but determined. We got a ride with a milkman until we arrived. The clerk was waiting for us at his office. The procedure was quick, cold. I signed the paper with trembling hands. It was done. I was officially Mrs. Eleanor Tanner, wife of Nathaniel Tanner. We returned to our town the same day. Nathaniel left me near my house with the promise that in 3 days, when his father went to Pittsburgh on business, we would run away together. He gave me a passionate kiss and left without knowing what I was planning to do next. 2 days later, on Wednesday, I packed my only suitcase with the few belongings I had. I hid my marriage certificate with Nathaniel at the bottom of an empty cookie tin. On Thursday, when Nathaniel went to work at his father's pharmacy, I met Walter at the train station, as arranged. He was radiant, had bought first-class tickets, a luxury I had never experienced. During the journey to Charleston, he told me all his plans for the store, for our house, for our life together. And I, God forgive me, smiled and pretended to share that joy while my heart was heavy with guilt for what I was doing. We arrived in Charleston on Friday. Walter lodged me in the home of a trusted lady to maintain appearances until the wedding. On Saturday, May 22nd, we married in the city's main church. I, who was already Mrs. Tanner for just 5 days, now also became Mrs. Montgomery, and thus began the most anguished period of my life. For almost 4 months, I lived completely separate lives. When Nathaniel said he needed to stay at the pharmacy for a few days, I would send a message to Walter saying I needed to visit a sick cousin in Millbrook. When Walter left on business trips, I would run back to Nathaniel's arms. It was an impossible lie to maintain, I knew, but each day that passed, each new deception, each new excuse, made it harder to find a way out. I was trapped in a web I had woven myself, and there was no way to escape without hurting someone or myself. The worst was living with the constant fear of being discovered. Each knock at the door made me tremble. Each letter that arrived could be the revelation of my secret. I lost so much weight in those months that my new dresses, gifts from Walter, hung loose on my body. I couldn't sleep properly. I had terrible nightmares where I was stoned in the town square, where Nathaniel and Walter discovered everything and killed me together. But fate has cruel ways of making us pay for our mistakes. And my moment of reckoning was about to arrive in a way I could never have predicted. It was during the feast of the patron saint of our town in September 1961, Our Lady of Sorrows. Irony of fate? No. That year, the celebration would be bigger than usual. The mayor had managed to bring a famous band from the capital. There would be a fair, an auction of prizes, a dance in the square. Everyone was excited. The entire town was decorated with colorful flags. I was in Charleston with Walter. It had been almost a month since I had seen Nathaniel. I had told him that a distant aunt had fallen ill, and I needed to care for her. The truth was that the fabric store Walter had opened was in its first months, and I couldn't be absent. I was learning to handle the accounting books, serve customers, organize the inventory. Walter was proud of how quickly I learned, of how I had a knack for business. God knew what he was doing when he put you in my path, Eleanor, he would tell me almost every day, and I would smile, swallowing the guilt that consumed me from within. Because the truth is that, even living in that terrible lie, I had begun to feel something for Walter. It wasn't the overwhelming passion I felt for Nathaniel, but a quiet feeling, made of gratitude, of admiration, perhaps even a different kind of love. He treated me with such respect, with such consideration. No one had ever treated me like that before. I received a telegram from Nathaniel that week. It simply said, "Return for the patron saint's feast. I have news. Miss you." And my heart raced when I read it. What news could it be? Was he finally ready to take me to Pittsburgh to begin the life he had promised? I told Walter I needed to return to Millbrook for the patron saint's feast. It was tradition. I had never missed it. It would be strange if I didn't appear. He understood, as always. Walter was like that, understanding, patient. He said he would take advantage of the time to make a business trip to Louisville where he had suppliers to visit. "I'll be back Monday, my dear. Enjoy the festival. Pray to the saint for us." I left on Friday morning with my heart racing. The anxiety to see Nathaniel mixed with the constant fear of being discovered. I arrived in Millbrook in the late afternoon. My small house was still there, closed. I kept it to have somewhere to stay when I returned, and also as part of my disguise. For Nathaniel, I lived there and visited my sick cousin occasionally. For Walter, I lived with this cousin and visited Millbrook occasionally. Nathaniel came to see me as soon as he knew I had arrived. He was different, thinner, with deep circles under his eyes. He said he had missed me terribly, that he couldn't wait for us to finally be together for real. "I did it, Eleanor. I finally did it." His eyes shone with excitement. "I got a job at my friend August's drugstore in Pittsburgh. We can leave next week for good." My blood froze. The moment I had both feared and desired had arrived. I would have to choose. I could no longer continue with that impossible farce. "But your father? Does he know?" "Not yet. I'll tell him after the festival. He'll be furious, of course, but I'm a grown man. He can't stop me. And when he sees we're well established, he'll accept it. I'm sure." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe we would finally have our chance, that all those months of lies would have been worth it. But a part of me no longer trusted Nathaniel as much as before. I had seen how Walter kept his promises, how responsible he was, how he gave me security. And Nathaniel, it was still just words, just plans for the future. The festival began on Saturday. The main square was beautiful, all lit up with colored lights, booths with typical foods, games, the band playing. It seemed like the entire town was there. I wore a new dress, a gift from Walter, though Nathaniel thought I had made it with fabric bought with my savings. It was a pleasant night. Nathaniel was affectionate, attentive. We danced together, ate sweets, talked about our plans. For a few hours, I forgot about my other husband, my other life, the monstrous lie I was living. On Sunday, the festival would continue after the solemn Mass. Nathaniel and I arranged to meet in the square at dusk. I spent the day at home thinking, trying to decide what to do. Would I go with Nathaniel to Pittsburgh? Would I return to Walter in Charleston? How would I explain my disappearance to either of them? When the sun began to set, I got ready and headed toward the square. My heart was heavy, my head full of doubts. I spotted Nathaniel from afar, waiting for me near the bandstand. I walked in his direction, trying to smile, trying to appear normal. That's when I saw it. On the other side of the square, stepping out of a black automobile, was Walter, my second husband, who should have been in Louisville, miles away. Time seemed to freeze. The air became heavy, difficult to breathe. Walter looked around, probably looking for me. I was paralyzed, unable to move, to think, to react. Nathaniel noticed my expression of horror and followed my gaze. "What is it, Eleanor? You look like you've seen a ghost." And then it happened. Walter saw me. Our eyes met across the crowded square. I saw the confusion in his eyes, then recognition, Then something I had never seen before in that always gentle face. Anger. He began to walk in our direction, determined. "Who is that man, Eleanor?" Nathaniel asked, sensing the tension of the situation. "Why is he coming here with that face?" My voice disappeared. I couldn't speak, couldn't explain. There was no possible explanation. There was no way out. Walter reached us, his face red with contained fury. "So this is where your sick cousin is, Eleanor?" Nathaniel looked at me, then at Walter, not understanding. "Who are you? What do you want with my wife?" It was as if a bomb had exploded in the square. "Your wife?" Walter shouted, attracting the attention of everyone around. "This woman is my wife. We were married in May in Charleston." "That's impossible," Nathaniel retorted, his voice trembling. "Eleanor and I were married civilly in May too, on the 17th. The two men stared at me, waiting for an explanation, a denial, anything. But I couldn't speak. My world was crumbling before my eyes, and there was nothing I could do to prevent it. People began to approach, attracted by the argument. I recognized familiar faces: Miss Eugenia the seamstress, Mr. Harrison the pharmacist, Nathaniel's father, the priest, neighbors, childhood friends, all looking, all listening. "Is this true, Eleanor?" Nathaniel's voice was almost a whisper now, as if begging me to deny everything for there to be some reasonable explanation. I looked at him, then at Walter, then at all those faces around us, and for the first time in months, I spoke the truth. "Yes, it's true." What followed was like a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. The shouts, the insults, the accusations. Mr. Harrison grabbed his son by the arm, dragging him away from me, shouting that he had warned him I was no good, that I was a washerwoman's daughter and couldn't come to any good. Walter, always so controlled, threw his wedding ring on the ground and walked away stiffly, back straight, head held high in wounded dignity. And I stood there in the middle of the square, the target of all gazes, all comments, all contempt. The women called me names I dare not repeat. The men made crude jokes. The children were sent away, as if my disgrace was contagious. The priest, who had celebrated my wedding to Walter, approached. His face was a mask of disappointment and condemnation. "You have committed a most grievous sin, Eleanor. Bigamy is a crime in the eyes of God and men. You can no longer be part of this community." There was no formal trial, no court, but the sentence was clear. I was banished. No one would speak to me again. No one would give me work. No one would sell me food. I no longer existed for that town that had been my only home for 23 years. I returned to my house staggering, legs weak, face washed with tears. I gathered what little of value I had: some clothes, the wedding rings that now weighed like lead on my fingers, the money I had saved for emergencies. I put everything in a bundle, as I had seen my mother do so many times when we moved houses, fleeing from overdue rent. I didn't wait for dawn. I left in the middle of the night, sneaking through the deserted streets. The festival had ended abruptly, but I knew that the next day the entire town would be commenting on the scandal. I couldn't be there to hear it, to see the looks, to endure the humiliation. I walked to the train station several miles from town. When the first morning train arrived, I bought a ticket to the farthest destination I could afford, New York. Although I had never been beyond Charleston, I knew New York was big enough to get lost in, to hide in, to start over. The journey took almost 2 days, with several transfers. I barely ate, barely slept, always looking over my shoulder, fearing to see Nathaniel or Walter or some acquaintance who might turn me in. When I finally arrived at Grand Central Station in New York, I was exhausted, starving, desperate. The city swallowed me, so big, so noisy, so different from everything I knew. People walked hurriedly. No one looked at anyone. The buildings were so tall, you could hardly see the sky. The automobiles, the streetcars, the constant movement. I, a simple small-town girl, felt lost, insignificant. My money lasted only a week, staying in a cheap boarding house near the station. Then I had to look for work, any work. But who would employ a woman alone, without references, without experience, without proper documents? My papers were in the name of Eleanor Tanner or Eleanor Montgomery, but I couldn't use either without risking being found. I truly knew hunger in those first months in New York. The kind of hunger that hurts, that consumes, that makes you consider things you never thought you would be capable of. I slept on park benches, in shelters when I could get a few coins, once even in the stairwell of a building under construction. It was when I was at my most desperate moment that I met Mrs. Jacinta. I was rummaging through a garbage bin behind a restaurant, looking for something to eat, when she saw me. Instead of chasing me away as I expected, she called me inside. Mrs. Jacinta was the cook at the restaurant, a middle-aged black woman with an easy smile and eyes that seemed to see through to the soul. She fed me that day, a full plate, real hot food for the first time in weeks. While I devoured it, she asked no questions, just sat there watching. When I finished, I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, ashamed of my manners, of my appearance, of my situation. Thank you, ma'am. God bless you. God blesses me every day by giving me health to work, she replied, with that simple wisdom that only people who have suffered a lot possess. Do you have a place to sleep, child? I shook my head, eyes downcast. Need work? I looked at her, a glimmer of hope lighting inside me. Yes, ma'am, I'll do anything. I know how to wash, iron, clean, cook a little. I need someone to help clean the restaurant in the early morning. It's not much, but it'll pay for a room's rent and food. Interested? That's how I began my new life in New York, working as a cleaner at Mrs. Jacinta's restaurant, living in a small room in the back of a tenement, rebuilding myself from the ashes of my disgrace. During that entire first year, I lived in constant fear. Fear of being found, fear that my past would catch up with me, fear that some acquaintance from Millbrook, from Nathaniel or Walter, would appear at the restaurant and recognize me. I kept my head down, spoke little, avoided making friends. Mrs. Jacinta respected my silence, my desire for privacy, but she was observant. She noticed my startles when someone entered the restaurant suddenly, my habit of checking the exits, my dread when someone mentioned West Virginia. One night, when we had finished cleaning and the restaurant was already closed, she offered me coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the comfortable silence between us broken only by the clinking of cups. "You're running from someone, aren't you, child?" she finally asked, her voice soft, without judgment. I raised my eyes from the cup, startled. I thought about denying it, about making up a story, as I had done so many times before. But something in Mrs. Jacinta's look, perhaps the genuine kindness, perhaps the lack of judgment, made me want to tell the truth. For the first time since I left Millbrook, I told my story to someone. Everything. The 2 marriages, the discovery, the escape, the shame, the fear. I expected to see the same look of disapproval I had seen on the priest's face, on the women of the town, on everyone in Millbrook. But what I saw was understanding, compassion. "Desperation makes us do things we never imagined we were capable of," she said simply. "I'm not saying what you did was right, it wasn't. But I understand why. And if there's one thing I've learned in this life, it's that no one has the right to cast the first stone." That conversation was a turning point for me. It didn't erase my guilt, didn't eliminate my fear, but it made me see that perhaps, just perhaps, I could find redemption. That my terrible mistake didn't have to define the rest of my life. I continued working at the restaurant for 2 more years. Over time, Mrs. Jacinta gave me more responsibilities. I learned to cook more elaborate dishes, to deal with suppliers, to manage the finances of the small establishment. For the first time in my life, I felt I was building something, that I was growing, that I was becoming more than just the washerwoman's daughter or the woman who married twice. But the past has a peculiar way of finding us, no matter how much we try to flee from it, and mine was about to knock on my door in a way I could never have imagined. It was on a Sunday afternoon in 1964, almost 3 years after my escape from Millbrook, that the past finally found me. I was at the restaurant helping serve lunch. We had a loyal clientele on Sundays, entire families who came after Mass to savor Mrs. Jacinta's famous gumbo. I was delivering a plate when I heard a voice that made my blood freeze. "Eleanor? Eleanor Bradford, is that really you?" I looked up and saw Bernice Rogers, a former neighbor from Millbrook. She was older, heavier, but the look of malicious curiosity remained the same. She was accompanied by her husband and 2 teenage children I didn't know. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. 3 years of caution, of discretion, of reconstruction, and it took just one chance, one coincidence for everything to threaten to crumble. "I think you're confusing me with someone else," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, my face impassive. "My name is Mary, Mary Sorrows." But Bernice wasn't convinced. Her eyes shone with that peculiar excitement of people who discover a scandalous secret. No, I'm sure it's you, Dorothy's daughter, the washerwoman, the one who married 2 men at the same time. Everyone in Millbrook still talks about it, you know? Nathaniel was never the same, poor thing. And the other one? What was his name again? Walter. He disappeared. They say he went to Ohio." Each word was like a stab, not only for bringing up memories I tried to bury, but for knowing that even after so long, my mistake was still a topic, still causing pain. "You're mistaken," I insisted, placing the plate on the table with trembling hands. "Excuse me, I have to get back to work." But the damage was done. In the days that followed, I noticed the looks of the other employees, the whispers when I passed. Bernice certainly didn't keep the secret to herself. Soon, everyone at the restaurant knew my story, distorted and exaggerated probably. Mrs. Jacinta tried to protect me. She told the employees she wouldn't tolerate gossip, that my past was nobody's business. But I knew it was only a matter of time until the news spread further, until it reached the wrong ears, until I needed to flee again. One night, as we cleaned the kitchen after closing, Mrs. Jacinta called me for a talk. "Eleanor," she said, using my real name that she only used when we were alone, "you can't spend your whole life running. What else can I do if Nathaniel or Walter find out where I am? It's been 3 years, child. They've moved on with their lives. You need to move on with yours too. For real, not just hiding behind a false name, always looking over your shoulder." She was right, I knew. But how to truly start over, how to face the past, the consequences of my actions? "I have a niece who works at Bellevue Hospital," Mrs. Jacinta continued. "They're looking for assistants. You don't need much experience. They train you. It's honest work, Eleanor, work that helps people." The idea of working in a hospital had never occurred to me, but there was something appealing about it. Perhaps by caring for others, I could somehow compensate for the harm I had caused. But my documents are all in my married name. If I use any of them, I can be traced. Then get new documents. Start over for real, not as Mary Sorrows, but as Eleanor Bradford. Face your past with your head held high. It took me weeks to consider the suggestion. The fear was still strong, but for the first time in years, I also felt something different. Hope. Hope for a life that wasn't just surviving, hiding, fearing. A life with purpose. In January 1965, I entered Bellevue Hospital for the first time as a general services assistant. My job was simple: clean rooms, change bed sheets, help transport patients. Nothing glamorous, nothing extraordinary. But there was a dignity in that work that I had never felt before. I remember the first patient I really interacted with. He was an elderly man, hospitalized with pneumonia, with no family to visit him. While I was changing his sheets, he suddenly grabbed my hand. "Miss," he said, his voice weak, "could you give me a glass of water?" A simple request, trivial even. But the gratitude in his eyes when I returned with the water, when I helped him drink, touched me deeply. In that moment, I realized that even the smallest gesture of care can mean the world to someone who is suffering. I began to pay more attention to the patients, to do small favors, to talk with those who seemed lonely. It wasn't my job, but it gave me a satisfaction I had never experienced before. For the first time in my life, I felt I was doing something truly good, something that didn't involve lies or deception. One of the nurses, Mrs. Martha, noticed my interest, my dedication. She was a lady of about 60, gray hair always immaculately tied in a bun, penetrating blue eyes behind thick-framed glasses. "You have a knack for this, you know," she told me one day, as she watched me help an elderly patient eat. "Have you ever thought about becoming a nurse's aide?" "Me? But I don't have enough education." "That can be resolved. There are night courses to complete high school. Then all you need is the nurse's aide course. With your practical experience, it would be easy." The idea was both frightening and stimulating. Me, who had barely completed elementary school, who was just the washerwoman's daughter, who carried the weight of a terrible mistake, could I really become a healthcare professional? "I don't know if I'm capable," I confessed. "We are all capable of much more than we imagine, Eleanor, especially when we find a purpose greater than ourselves." Those words stayed with me for days. A purpose greater than myself. Wasn't that exactly what I was seeking? A way to compensate for the harm I had done, to give some meaning to my suffering and to the suffering I had caused others? In March of that same year, I enrolled in a night course to complete high school. I worked at the hospital during the day, studied at night, slept only the essential. It was a period of physical exhaustion, but also of an intellectual awakening I had never experienced. I discovered I liked learning, that I had a facility with biology and natural sciences. Mathematics was harder, but I worked twice as hard. Each new understanding, each small academic victory, was a step away from that desperate girl who had committed such a serious mistake out of fear of poverty. It took 2 intense years to complete high school. Mrs. Martha accompanied me throughout the process, encouraging me, lending me books, sometimes even helping me with the more difficult lessons. She became more than a mentor. She became the friend I never had, the mother I lost so early. In 1967, at 29, I began the nurse's aide course. Most of the students were much younger than me, girls of 18, 19, with dreams of marriage and family. I was the oldest in the class, the most serious, the most dedicated. I had no time for romantic dreams. My goal was clear, focused, to become the best nurse's aide I could be. It was during the course that something happened that would change my life again. We were having a class on professional ethics, on confidentiality, on how to handle sensitive patient information. The teacher was talking about the importance of confidentiality when she mentioned, "You will be the depositories of secrets, of vulnerabilities, of mistakes. It is not for you to judge, only to care. Every human being makes mistakes. What defines us is not our mistakes, but how we choose to live after them." Those words hit me like lightning. It was as if she were speaking directly to me, to my situation. I felt hot tears streaming down my face before I even realized I was crying. After class, the teacher, Dr. Helen, called me for a private conversation. She was a middle-aged woman, serene, with that quiet authority of someone who deeply knows her craft. "I noticed you became emotional during class, Eleanor. Is there something you'd like to share?" I can't explain what led me to trust her. Perhaps it was the fatigue of carrying that secret for so long. Perhaps it was the need to be truly seen by someone, to be judged for who I was now, not just for my past mistake. I told her everything. My poor childhood, my mother's death, my desperation, the 2 marriages, the escape, the years of fear and guilt. When I finished, I was exhausted, empty, but also strangely lighter. I expected to see the same look of disapproval I had seen on the priest's face in Millbrook, but what I found was understanding. "Thank you for trusting me with your story, Eleanor," she said simply. "Do you know what I see before me? I don't see a criminal, nor a sinner. I see a woman who made a serious mistake, yes, but who is doing everything she can to redeem herself, to build a life of service to others. Do you think that's possible? That I can truly redeem myself? I don't just think it's possible. I think you're already on the path. You've chosen a profession of care, of giving. You're studying, striving, growing as a person. True repentance isn't in words, but in actions, in daily choices. I left that conversation transformed. For the first time in many years, I allowed myself the possibility of forgiveness. Not just the forgiveness of others, but primarily my own forgiveness. The idea that my mistake, however serious it was, didn't have to define me forever. That I could, through my choices, my work, build a different legacy. In 1968, I graduated as a nurse's aide. Mrs. Martha was at my graduation, proud, as if I were her own daughter. Dr. Helen, too. They were the only people there for me, but they were enough. They were my new family, a family I had chosen as much as they had chosen me. I began working in pediatrics at Bellevue Hospital. There was something especially rewarding about caring for children. Perhaps because I never had children of my own. Perhaps because each child I helped recover was like a small victory against all the evil in the world, including the evil I myself had caused. Children responded well to me. I had patience, gentleness, and a special ability to comfort them during painful or frightening procedures. Parents trusted me too. They felt their children were in good hands when I was on duty. There were difficult days, of course, days when we lost patience, when the pain seemed greater than any possibility of healing. But there were also days of miracles, of unexpected recoveries, of smiles returning to faces that had known only pain. In 1970, I received a proposal to specialize in pediatric palliative care, a new, challenging field that few professionals wanted to face. Working with terminally ill children, accompanying them in their final moments, comforting families shattered by imminent loss, was the most emotionally difficult work, but also the most deeply meaningful. "Are you sure you want this specialization, Eleanor?" asked Mrs. Martha, concerned. "It's an area that demands a lot from us, not just professionally, but as human beings." "I'm sure," I replied without hesitation. "If there are children who need to go through this, then there should be someone willing to hold their hands during the journey. I want to be that person." And so, at 32, I found my true calling. In the years that followed, I accompanied dozens of children in their final days. I learned to recognize the signs, to manage pain, to create small moments of joy, even in the darkest circumstances. I learned to cry with families and to celebrate each day, each hour, each minute of life. I especially remember one boy, Charlie, only 7 years old, with an inoperable brain tumor. In the last weeks, he was increasingly weak, more confused, but there were moments of lucidity when we would talk about his dreams, about the stars, about the cartoons he loved. On the night he passed, I was alone with him in the room. His parents had gone to get coffee, exhausted after days of constant vigil. Charlie suddenly opened his eyes, clearer and more lucid than they had been in weeks. "Nurse Eleanor," he said, his voice just a whisper, "do you think God will forgive me for breaking Mom's vase?" I said it was the cat, but it was me. I held his little hand in mine, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'm sure he will, Charlie. God forgives our mistakes, especially when we truly repent." He smiled, relieved, and closed his eyes again. Minutes later, his parents returned, and I was still holding his hand when he took his last breath. That night, crying alone in my small apartment, I realized something fundamental. If I sincerely believed in forgiveness for that boy, why couldn't I also believe in forgiveness for myself? It was a moment of epiphany. It didn't completely erase my guilt. I doubt that will ever happen. But it allowed me to see my story in a new light, not just as the story of a terrible mistake, but as the story of a possible redemption, of a transformation, of a life dedicated to compensating for evil with good. In the years that followed, I continued my work at Bellevue Hospital, specializing more and more in palliative care, not just for children, but for patients of all ages. I became a reference in the field, I was invited to give lectures, to train new professionals. At 40 in 1978, I was invited to coordinate the hospital's first palliative care unit. A recognition of my work, my dedication, my experience. It was an enormous responsibility, but also an opportunity to expand the impact of my work, to help even more people at such a vulnerable time in their lives. I accepted the challenge and threw myself into it body and soul. I developed protocols, trained teams, fought for more resources, for more dignity for terminal patients. It was exhausting work, often frustrating when we ran into bureaucracy or lack of understanding about the importance of palliative care. But each patient who departed in peace, each family that found some comfort amid the pain, each professional who learned the importance of humanized care was a small victory. And I needed these victories as I needed air to breathe. It was during this period that I received a letter that would once again open the doors to my past in a way I could never have imagined. The letter arrived on an ordinary day in 1980, when I was already 42 years old. I received it at my small apartment in Greenwich Village, where I had been living for almost a decade. It was a simple envelope, yellowed, with my name and address written in a shaky handwriting that I didn't immediately recognize. There was no return address. I opened it with that apprehension that never completely abandoned me, even after so many years. Inside was a single handwritten sheet of paper. Dear Mrs. Eleanor, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Clara Morton, a former resident of Millbrook. I don't know if you remember me. I was a friend of your mother, Dorothy. I learned of your whereabouts by chance through Bernice Rogers, who saw you in New York years ago. I am writing to inform you that Nathaniel Tanner is very ill. He suffered a stroke 3 months ago and is in the municipal nursing home, unable to care for himself. His father's pharmacy failed many years ago, and he has no family who can help him. Before you throw this letter away, let me say, I am not asking for anything. I just thought you should know. What you do with this information is your decision. Respectfully, Clara Morton. I read and reread that letter so many times that I memorized every word. Nathaniel sick. Nathaniel alone. Nathaniel in the Millbrook Municipal Nursing Home, that place everyone in town feared, known for its neglect, for the lack of adequate care, for the sadness that hung in its dark corridors. My first instinct was to ignore it, to throw the letter away and continue with my life. After all, what did I owe Nathaniel? Wasn't it he who had dragged me into that impossible situation? Wasn't it because of his promises that I made the most catastrophic decision of my life? But there was another voice within me, softer, more insistent. The voice of the nurse I had become, of the professional who believed that every human being deserves care and dignity, especially in moments of greatest vulnerability. The voice of the woman who had dedicated the last 2 decades to trying to compensate for the harm she had caused. I spent sleepless nights, debating with myself. If I returned to Millbrook, I would face all the ghosts I had left behind. The scandal, the shame, the looks of contempt. I had built a new life in New York, a respected identity, meaningful work, to risk all this for a man I barely knew in the end. That's when I remembered Charlie, that 7-year-old boy, and his concern about forgiveness for a broken vase. If I believed in forgiveness for him, for so many other patients who had shared their regrets with me over the years, how could I deny myself the opportunity to seek my own? 3 weeks after receiving the letter, I requested leave from the hospital. I said only that I needed to resolve urgent family matters. My superiors, recognizing my years of dedication without ever taking vacations, granted a month's leave. The journey from New York to Millbrook was long and lonely. Each mile the bus traveled seemed to take me not just back to my hometown, but back in time to that desperate young woman I had been. When I finally arrived on a rainy June afternoon, the town seemed both familiar and strange. Some new buildings, others gone. The main square was different, more tree-lined, but the slow pace, the air of a small town where everyone knows each other, that remained the same. I stayed at a small inn at the entrance to town, where I would be less likely to be recognized immediately. I said only that I was passing through on business. The innkeeper, a younger woman I didn't know, asked no questions. The next morning I went to the municipal nursing home. It was an old building that had been the hospital decades ago. The paint was peeling, the windows were dirty, a smell of mold and cheap disinfectant hung in the air. As a nurse, my heart ached to see the precarious conditions, the evident lack of resources, the neglect. At the reception, an elderly lady was knitting, looking bored. When I approached, she raised her eyes without much interest. "Good morning. I've come to visit a patient, Nathaniel Tanner." She consulted an old notebook, the pages yellowed and worn from use. "Tanner, yes. Male ward, room 17. Are you a relative?" I hesitated. What to say? Wife? Ex-wife? Friend? "I'm an acquaintance from many years ago." She nodded without showing curiosity. "You can go in. Visits end at 4. I walked through the somber corridors, my heart beating so hard I feared it might be heard. The rooms were collective, with 4 or 5 beds each, elderly people in different states of health, some sitting, staring at nothing, others lying motionless. The absence of life in those eyes, the resignation, the waiting for the end. As a healthcare professional, I knew that look well. Room 17 was at the end of the corridor. It was like the others, peeling walls, windows that barely let in sunlight, a ceiling fan that spun lazily, spreading more heat than relieving it. There were 5 beds in the room. I identified Nathaniel in the 3rd, near the window. If I hadn't known it was him, I might not have recognized him. The handsome, full-of-life young man who had promised me the world was now a prematurely aged man, thin, almost skeletal, the right side of his face paralyzed by the stroke, his eyes sunken, his hair, once black and shiny, now thin and completely white. I approached slowly, uncertain if he would be lucid, if he would recognize me, if he would be disturbed by my presence. He was awake, looking out the window, but his gaze seemed distant, lost in thoughts or memories. "Nathaniel," I called softly, stopping beside the bed. He turned his face slowly, the effort visible in each movement. His eyes, once so alive, now clouded, took time to focus on me. There was a moment of confusion. Then something like recognition passed over his face. "Nor," he managed to say. His voice hoarse, dragged, difficult to understand because of the facial paralysis. I nodded, feeling tears form in my eyes. "Yes, it's me. You came back." It wasn't a question, but there was astonishment in his voice and something else I couldn't identify. "I heard you were sick. I came to see how I can help." A strange sound escaped his lips, something between a laugh and a sob. Help. After everything. There was bitterness in his words, but I couldn't blame him. What I had done had no excuse, no acceptable justification. Yes, after everything. I'm a nurse now, Nathaniel. I work with patients in situations like yours. I know I can't undo the past, but I can try to do something for your present. He looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to decipher my intentions, as if looking for some sign of falsity, of deception. Finally, he turned his face to the window again. "Why do you care?" It was a fair question. Why did I care? Why had I traveled hundreds of miles, faced my worst fears, to see a man I barely knew, with whom I had lived a lie for a few months, almost 20 years ago? Because I've spent my entire adult life trying to make up for the harm I caused. Because I've learned that everyone deserves care and dignity, especially when they're vulnerable. Because maybe by helping you, I can finally find some kind of peace. He didn't respond, but a solitary tear ran down the non-paralyzed side of his face. We remained in silence for some time, only the noise of the fan and Nathaniel's difficult breathing filling the air. In the days that followed, I established a routine. I spent mornings at the nursing home, helping with care, not just for Nathaniel, but for other patients as well. My experience as a nurse was immediately noticed and appreciated by the only overworked employee who tried to take care of all the elderly. I brought small comforts, better ointment for bed sores, a more suitable pillow, easier to swallow foods for those who had difficulty swallowing. Simple things, but which made a difference in the quality of life for those people. With Nathaniel, the relationship was complex. In the first days, he barely spoke, just watched me with those eyes that had lost their sparkle. Gradually, however, he began to open up. He told me about his life after the scandal, how his father disowned him, how the pharmacy failed, how he fell into alcoholism, how he spent years wandering from town to town, doing temporary jobs until the stroke brought him back to Millbrook, with nowhere to go except the municipal nursing home. There was no direct accusation in his words, but I felt the weight of responsibility. Not that I was the only one to blame for his choices, for his fate, but I had contributed, without a doubt, to the course his life had taken. One afternoon, as I helped him eat, he asked me the question I had feared since the first day. "And, Walter, did you visit him too?" I lowered my eyes, unable to face him. "I heard from Clara that he moved to Ohio many years ago. I know nothing more about him." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "He was a good man. Didn't deserve." "You didn't deserve it either, Nathaniel," I replied, my voice choked. "Neither of you deserved what I did." He was silent for a moment, then said something that surprised me. "I, too, guilty. Promises I wouldn't keep." It was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Not that it justified my actions, but knowing that Nathaniel recognized his part in that complex story, that he didn't see me only as the villain, brought a relief I didn't know I needed. "We were young, desperate, each in our own way," I replied. "You for approval, me for security. We made terrible choices. And now, no time." There was a deep sadness in those simple words, the recognition of wasted lives, of lost opportunities, of paths that could no longer be resumed. 3 weeks passed like this, in difficult conversations, in loaded silences, in small gestures of care. Nathaniel's condition was gradually worsening. The stroke had been severe, affecting not only his mobility and speech, but also internal organs. The doctors who rarely appeared at the nursing home had been clear. It was only a matter of time. On a particularly hot July morning, I arrived at the nursing home and found Nathaniel more agitated than usual. His breathing was more laborious, his face paler. I recognized the signs immediately. Working with palliative care, you develop a sixth sense for the proximity of death. I sat beside him, holding his hand. He squeezed mine with surprising strength, as if afraid I might leave. "Stay with me?" he asked, his voice almost inaudible. "I'm here, Nathaniel. I'm not going anywhere." We spent the day like this, in silent vigil. I moistened his lips, adjusted his position in bed to facilitate breathing, administered the pain medication the doctor had prescribed. It was the kind of care I had offered to hundreds of patients over the years, but never with the emotional weight I felt now. In the late afternoon, as the sun began to set, casting a golden light through the simple room, Nathaniel had a moment of clarity, his eyes fixed on mine with a lucidity he hadn't shown in weeks. "Eleanor," he said, his voice surprisingly firm, "I forgive you." I felt tears flowing freely down my face. "And I ask your forgiveness, Nathaniel, for everything." He sketched a smile, the first real smile I had seen since I returned. "We are free now." They were his last words. Hours later, when night had already fallen, Nathaniel Tanner departed this world, holding my hand, his face serene, at peace. I arranged the funeral, simple but dignified. To my surprise, some people showed up, old friends, former employees of the pharmacy, neighbors. No one treated me with the contempt or hostility I feared. Perhaps time had softened the memory of the scandal, Or perhaps the town had more recent problems to comment on. Clara was there. She was the only one who approached me directly after the ceremony. "It was brave of you to come back, Eleanor." "It wasn't courage, Clara. It was necessity. I needed to do this for him and for myself." She nodded understandingly. "And as for Walter, you know he's still alive, don't you? In Columbus." My heart leaped. Do you know how to find him?" "I have an address from a few years back. I don't know if it's still valid." She hesitated, then added, "He remarried, has adult children now, an established life." I felt a pang of something, not exactly jealousy, but perhaps a lament for what could have been in another life, in other circumstances. "Do you think I should look for him too?" Clara considered the question for a moment. "I can't answer that for you, Eleanor. Only you know what you need to find peace." I returned to New York after the funeral, carrying with me Walter's address and a decision I hadn't yet made. I returned to my work at Bellevue Hospital, to my routines, to the life I had built with so much effort. But something had changed inside me. The visit to Millbrook, the reunion with Nathaniel, those last moments of mutual forgiveness had stirred old wounds that I thought were healed. I frequently dreamed of Walter, of our brief time together, of the look of disappointment and anger I saw on his face that fateful night in the square. After months of indecision, I finally took courage. On a December afternoon in 1980, I sat at my small desk and wrote a letter to Walter Montgomery, addressed to the last known place where he lived. I didn't directly ask for forgiveness. I knew it was asking too much, that some wounds are too deep for words. I just told him about my life since that night, about my work as a nurse, about how I had tried each day to be a better person than I was in those months of 1961. I ended by saying, "I don't expect a response, nor do I deserve one. I just wanted you to know that I never forgot the harm I caused and that I have dedicated my life to trying to compensate for it, not just for you, but for all those who cross my path needing care and compassion." I sent the letter without great expectations. The address was probably outdated, or Walter would throw it away without reading, or his wife would intercept it. But I had done my part, taken the step I needed to take. Weeks passed without a response, as I expected. Life continued its normal course until in February 1981, I received a simple envelope with a Columbus postmark. Inside was a white card with just one phrase, written in a handwriting I recognized immediately, even after so many years. "May God forgive us both." That was all. No expressed resentment, no explicit forgiveness, but neither hatred nor accusation. Just the recognition of our shared humanity, of our failures, of our common need for redemption. I kept that card as a treasure. In the years that followed, in moments of doubt or discouragement, I would reread it, finding in those few words the strength to continue, to be better, to honor the second chance that life had given me. The journey of reconciliation with my past was just beginning. But for the first time, I felt that perhaps, just perhaps, the forgiveness of others and of myself was not an impossible mirage, but a destination I might one day reach. That small card from Walter changed something fundamental inside me. It wasn't complete forgiveness, it wasn't absolution, but it was a recognition of our shared humanity. May God forgive us both. Simple words that carried an immense weight, a relief that I didn't know I so desperately needed. The 1980s passed at a different pace for me. I continued my work at Bellevue Hospital, now as a supervisor of the palliative care unit I had helped create. There were more administrative responsibilities, more meetings, more papers to fill out, but I never let that distance me from what really mattered, the patients, direct care, comfort in the final moments. In 1985, at 47, I received an invitation that would again change the course of my life. Dr. Helen, my former teacher who had become a friend and mentor, was helping to found one of the first hospices in the United States, an institution dedicated exclusively to palliative care, inspired by models that were beginning to gain strength in Europe. "We need you in this project, Eleanor," she told me. her eyes shining with that enthusiasm that not even years in the profession had managed to erase. Your experience, your sensitivity with patients, your ability to train teams is exactly what we're looking for. It was a golden opportunity, a recognition of my decades of work, a chance to further expand the positive impact I could have. But it also meant leaving the hospital that had been my home for so long, the colleagues who had become family, the security of an established institution. After much reflection, I accepted. The hospice was inaugurated in 1986 in an adapted old house in the Upper West Side. It was small compared to Bellevue Hospital, just 12 beds, but there was something special about that place. From the first day, the colorful walls, the well-kept gardens, the absence of the institutional smell of a hospital, it was a place where people could live their last days with dignity, not just die surrounded by tubes and machines. My role was to coordinate the nursing team, but also to help establish the philosophy of care. We worked with a holistic approach, caring not just for physical symptoms, but also for the emotional, psychological, and spiritual needs of patients and their families. It was the most rewarding period of my career. Seeing terminal patients who arrived frightened, suffering, gradually finding comfort, peace, even moments of joy in their last days. There are no words to describe what this meant to me. Each smile, each grateful handshake, each family that found strength to face grief with serenity. All this gave me the certainty that I was on the right path. In 1990, I published my first article in a specialized nursing journal. It was about pain control techniques in terminal patients. Nothing revolutionary, just a compilation of the practices we had developed at the hospice, based both on science and on careful observation of each patient as a unique individual. To my surprise, the article had a repercussion far beyond what I expected. Invitations began to arrive for lectures, for consultations at other hospitals that wanted to implement palliative care units, for participation in conferences. I, who had always worked behind the scenes, suddenly found myself in the role of educator, of reference in the field. It was frightening at first. Who was I to teach others? A woman who had barely completed high school regularly, who had studied nursing as an adult, who carried such a heavy secret from the past. But Dr. Helen, as always, helped me overcome these insecurities. It's not the path we've traveled that matters, Eleanor, but what we've learned on it. And you've learned more about compassion, about true care, about dignity at the end of life, than many with diplomas hanging on the wall. I accepted the invitations one by one. I spoke at small hospitals in the countryside, at nursing schools, at national conferences, always with humility, always emphasizing that I spoke from practical experience, not theory. And perhaps it was precisely this approach that touched so many hearts. In 1994, at 56, I received a letter that left me shaken. It was from Columbus, but not from Walter. It was from his youngest son, Daniel. Dear Mrs. Eleanor, my name is Daniel Montgomery, Walter's youngest son. My father passed away 2 weeks ago from a heart attack. It was quick. He didn't suffer. Among his belongings, we found your letter from 1981, carefully kept in a box along with other important documents. We also found an envelope addressed to you, sealed but never sent. Inside, a letter dated 1993. After talking with my mother and my older brother, we decided that the right thing would be to send you this letter. My father never told us details about your past together. He only mentioned once, when I was already an adult, that there had been a woman before my mother who had deeply hurt him, but that he had learned to forgive. Whatever the history between you, I hope this letter brings some peace. Respectfully, Daniel Montgomery. Along with this note was the envelope that Walter had prepared, but never sent. My hands were shaking so much I could barely open it. Inside were several pages written in that handwriting that I still recognized, even after so many years, even having seen only a brief card in 1981. Dear Eleanor, it's strange to begin a letter like this after so many years, after everything. But I can't think of any other way to address you. I received your letter in 1981. At the time, I responded only with a card. I wasn't ready for more, to express everything I felt. There was still a lot of hurt, a lot of confusion. But your letter stayed with me all these years. I reread it occasionally. I learned by chance, through a report in a health magazine, about the important work you've been doing. I saw your photo. You were older, of course, like all of us, but I still recognize those eyes, that determined expression. I felt proud. Yes, proud. However strange that may seem, life takes us down unexpected paths, doesn't it? After what happened in Millbrook, I came to Columbus with a broken heart, not just from the betrayal, but from having been so naive, so trusting. I promised myself I would never believe in anyone again, but time is a patient teacher. I met Elizabeth 2 years later. She knew I carried wounds, though she didn't know exactly which ones, and she was patient with me. We married in 1965. We had 2 wonderful sons. The fabric store prospered, then transformed into a small clothing factory. I had a good life, Eleanor. I can't complain. For many years, I thought of you with anger, with bitterness. I imagined you had ended up badly, that you were paying for what you did. I'm not proud of these thoughts, but it would be dishonest to deny them. When I received your letter, something began to change. Knowing that you had found a path, that you had dedicated your life to alleviating the suffering of others, affected me in a way I didn't expect. I began to think, who am I to deny forgiveness to someone who has given so much of herself to compensate for her mistakes? It took me years to reach this conclusion. We are stubborn creatures, aren't we? We cling to our pain. Sometimes it becomes part of our identity. Letting go of resentment is almost like losing a piece of ourselves. But now, at 67, with white hair and a perspective that only time can give, I want you to know. I forgive you completely, Eleanor, not just with words on a card, but with all my heart. I don't know if our lives will cross again in this world. Perhaps it's better this way, but I wanted you to know that I think of you with affection now, and that I sincerely wish you find peace in your remaining days on this earth. With affection, Walter. I read that letter so many times that the folds in the paper began to wear out. The forgiveness I had sought for so many years finally expressed in a complete, unequivocal form. And Walter never got to send the letter, never knew how much it would mean to me. Fate has such ironies. I replied to Daniel, thanking him for sending his father's letter. I didn't go into details about our past, just said that Walter and I had met in our youth, that I had made mistakes that deeply hurt him, and that his forgiveness meant more to me than words could express. I also timidly asked if it would be possible to visit his grave someday. Daniel responded weeks later, kindly saying that I would be welcome whenever I wanted. He included the address of the cemetery and a note. My father rarely spoke of the past, but when he did, there was a certain melancholy in his eyes. I think you were important to him in a way we never fully understood. In May 1995, I made the trip to Columbus. It was autumn, the sky was clear, the air fresh, the cemetery was beautiful, well kept, with many trees. Walter's grave was simple but dignified, with his name, dates of birth and death, and the inscription, "Beloved husband, father, and grandfather. His integrity will live in our hearts." I left a small arrangement of flowers and stayed there for a while in silence. I didn't cry. It was more a feeling of completion, of a cycle that was finally closing. I thanked him in thought for the forgiveness, for the chance to know that he had had a good life, that my terrible mistake had not destroyed his future as I had feared for so many years. Before leaving, I placed on the tombstone the small card he had sent me in 1981, with those words that had accompanied me for so long, "May God forgive us both." It seemed right to return it now as a symbol that forgiveness was complete on both sides. I returned to New York lighter, more at peace with myself than I had ever been. I continued my work at the hospice with renewed energy. In 1998, at 60, I was invited to help develop a national palliative care program, working with the Department of Health. It was an opportunity to further expand the impact of my work, to help establish guidelines that would benefit patients across the country. I accepted, of course. I spent part of the week in Washington, part in New York. It was tiring for a woman my age, but incredibly rewarding. Seeing public policies changing, seeing more resources being directed to this neglected area, seeing young professionals becoming interested in palliative care was like a dream come true. In 2003, at 65, I officially retired. Officially is the key word here, because in practice, I continued working as a consultant, giving lectures, guiding projects, but now I could do this at my own pace, choosing what I accepted, reserving more time for myself. It was during this period that I began to write my memoirs, not with the intention of publishing. Who would be interested in the story of an ordinary nurse? But as a way to make peace with the past, to organize my experiences, to extract some meaning from the extraordinary journey that had been my life. I wrote about everything. My poor childhood in Millbrook, my mother's death, my desperation, the 2 marriages, the escape, the years of fear and reconstruction in New York, my nursing career, the meetings with Nathaniel and Walter decades later, the forgiveness finally found. It was a cathartic process, sometimes painful, but necessary. As I reread what I had written, I noticed patterns, connections, lessons that I hadn't noticed while living the events. I saw how each choice, each mistake, each success had led me exactly to where I needed to be. In 2008, I received a diagnosis that would again change my perspective. Breast cancer, already at an advanced stage. The irony didn't escape me. I, who had dedicated decades to caring for terminal patients, now became one. But contrary to what many might think, I didn't receive the news with despair. There was a certain peace in knowing that my time was coming to an end, that the journey was nearing its natural conclusion. I didn't fear death. How could I, after having witnessed so many passages, so many dignified and serene ends? I chose not to undergo aggressive treatments that would only prolong the inevitable. I knew too well the limits of medicine, the unnecessary suffering that often accompanies therapeutic obstinacy. I chose palliative care, precisely those I had helped develop throughout my career. My colleagues at the hospice welcomed me as a patient. It was strange to be on the other side, to be cared for instead of caring, but there was also a beauty in it, a closing of the circle. The young nurses and doctors I had trained now cared for me with the same compassion, the same attention to detail, the same respect for dignity that I had always advocated. During this period, I received visits from many who had crossed my professional path, former students, colleagues, even families of patients I had helped years before. It was moving to see the impact my work had had, the lives I had touched, often without even realizing it. One of these visits brought me a special surprise. It was Marina, daughter of a patient I had cared for in the 1990s. She had become a journalist and worked for a publishing house. "I remember you sitting beside my mother's bed, holding her hand, telling stories to distract her from the pain," she told me, her eyes moist. "You taught me how to be present in difficult moments, how to find small joys even in farewell." I never forgot. I was touched, of course, but didn't understand why she had specifically sought me out after so many years. "I'm here because I heard you wrote your memoirs," she continued. One of the nurses told me. "I'd like to read them, if you'll allow it." I hesitated. Those pages contained my complete story, including the terrible mistake of my youth, the shame, the escape, everything I had kept secret for so long. But something told me that perhaps it was time to let this story be known, that it might help others find redemption for their own mistakes. I allowed Marina to take my manuscript. A few weeks later, she returned, visibly moved. "Your story is extraordinary, Mrs. Eleanor. It's a story of redemption, of transformation, of how a terrible mistake can be the beginning of a life dedicated to doing good. I'd like to publish it, if you'll allow." The idea frightened me, to expose my shame, my deepest secret to the world. But Marina argued passionately. Think of how many people are out there carrying guilt, regrets, mistakes that seem unforgivable. Your story could show them that there's always a way back, that redemption is possible, that it's never too late to start over. I ended up agreeing on one condition, that the book would only be published after my death. Not out of fear of judgment, I had passed that phase, but because I wanted the story to be complete, to include my own passage as well. And now here I am, at 87, recording this testimony as a complement to the written memoirs. The cancer has progressed. The doctors say I have only a few weeks. I feel no fear or sadness, only a deep gratitude for the extraordinary journey that was my life. I know that many who hear or read my story will be shocked by what I did in my youth. Double marriages, lies, escape. I don't seek justifications. What I did was wrong, caused pain to innocent people, left scars that never completely disappeared. But I hope they also see what came after, the long and arduous path of redemption. How that desperate young woman, driven by fear and insecurity, gradually transformed into a woman capable of genuine compassion, of selfless service, of making a positive difference in the lives of hundreds of people in their most vulnerable moments. If there is a lesson I would like to leave, it's this. No mistake, however terrible it may seem, needs to define the rest of your life. True repentance isn't in words, but in actions, in daily choices to do better, to be better. Forgiveness from others and from yourself is possible, even if it takes decades to find it. And perhaps the most important lesson, it's never too late to start over, to redefine your story, to find purpose and meaning, even in the most unlikely circumstances. My life is proof of that. As I close my eyes to rest, I feel a peace I never imagined possible for someone with my past. A peace that comes not from the absence of regret, but from the certainty that, despite my mistakes, I managed to leave the world a little better than I found it. And in the end, isn't that what we all seek? Before saying goodbye, I'd like to ask you to leave a like on this video if my story touched your heart. Subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel to discover other life stories like mine, of people who, despite mistakes and difficulties, found their path to redemption. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and if any part of my story resonated with you. Each comment is a joy for this 87-year-old woman who learned, after so long, the value of sharing her truth.